a top up, but I know Stu's going to tell me.
Hello and welcome back for Mental Health Podcast. I'm Stu Whiffin, joining me always, Kirsty E. And you heard her voice already because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. She's literally trying to beat me to it. You all right?
I'm all right, but I've got like no tea left, and I wanted to get a refresh, but you won't let me, so I'm just going to have to be dry and spitting feathers.
Well, before today's guest turned up, you was more worried that you'd been eating a load of malt loaf and you had it stuck in your teeth.
Classic. I've got rid of that now. I'm all right.
Your pearly
Classic
whites
stuff.
look all right from here, mate. We're joined today by Dan Thompson. How are you, Dan?
Oh, I'm good, thank you, Stu. Yeah, good. Yeah, really good to be here. Like I was saying, like, really, really good to be here. It's a pleasure to be on here. So awesome. Thank you
Well,
for
we've been chatting a little bit before we've pressed record, and it was nice to hear that you'd listened to a couple of episodes before, and the fact that you actually sort of passed comment on the opening question and how you found that to be really interesting, and how people's different responses to that question, can really lay the foundations for the rest of the conversation. So, without wasting any more time, Dan, when you hear the words mental health, what do you think?
So for me, when I hear the words mental health, I associate it with all things to do with how well or not well somebody's coping with their particular mix in life. Like they're what I call their life cocktail. I know we're on a men's orientated podcast here, so the idea of cocktail maybe not be the right analogy, like linguistically to use, but like I do describe it as someone's life cocktail, i.e., what pressures, responsibilities, desires, dreams they may have, and then layered on top of that, any adversity they've got, any layers of difficulty or challenge or health issues or financial issues, and that to me is what defines a human's lens on their life, how they look at life. In psychology, they would call it your frame of reference, and it does incorporate everything from learned behaviors, experiences from childhood, but it goes through everything. It goes through everything in terms of like beliefs you carry about yourself, how you see yourself fitting into the world. And so, like, the reason why I was saying that, as I said, I love the question because the amount of diverse response you get when you ask that question, just to me, does exactly that. It just bounces back to you the diversity of human experience there is. And I think that is like one of the key components of being human, is the fact that we've all got our own life lens. And that can sometimes be such a barrier to you interacting with people or being understood by people or being seen in the world, being heard in the way that you want to. We've all had those experiences. So I think that's how I see mental health, is where all of that determines where you fall on the sliding scale, the spectrum between feeling well and not feeling well. And it can, of course, change and shift at different times in your life and depending on what's going on. So, yeah, that's
Absolutely.
that's how I see it.
Now, Dan, for listeners that are unaware of who you are and what you do, along the bottom of the screen here, I can see Dan Thompson, mindfulness, health, and wellbeing coach. Tell us a little bit about what that means, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. So mindfulness is a self-care practice that's got its origins and roots in Buddhism, but a long time ago, it got brought to the Western world in 1979 by an American professor, a medical professor, and he was a studying Buddhist, and practically saw people going through the system and still coming out the other side of their treatments from their medicines and their surgery still in lots of pain. So he brought this philosophy of his Buddhist teachings to try and help people change their relationship with their suffering effectively. And over the many years since then, the 40 years that have passed, it's become an incredibly popular and an incredibly well-known self-care practice in the world. And it's to the point where it's now so well known that you will see it featuring in alongside and as part of other sort of healing and health sort of programs. So even things in the NHS that advocate for mindfulness being used alongside other practices. But fundamentally at its heart, that's kind of where it came from. But at its heart, really what it's about is a practice that's got elements of meditation, but also self-reflective exercises to help you build up. And there's one word that sits at the center of it all, which is awareness, building up awareness about yourself and about your surroundings so that you can effectively learn to respond more healthily to what life throws at you rather than react in an automatic way. So it helps you effectively build internal space, like clarity, a space to be able to discern. That's a word that I like to use, discern, almost like instead of all your experiences being up in your grill and in your face, you can push them back and then you can look at them in a more calm, more objective manner. And then you can discern what's just noise, you know, what's noise. Is that actually valid, or is that just coming from, you know, the way I'm feeling in the situation? It helps you navigate from a moment to moment point of view life. But if you use it in the way that I like to teach it, it can be used in a much more wider spanning way, and you can use it in a kind of very intentional way that can help you approach situations in life in a much better way. A date, an interview, you know, a life-changing experience, making a decision. You know, it's got far-reaching, quite a big rabbit hole to go down, but it's got some really far-reaching effects. But it is a really powerful tool that I think is a little bit misunderstood, actually. And I also think a little bit like it's become so popular that, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that some of the magic and the nuggets in it that can be really powerful can get a bit lost. And I look sort of aim in my teachings, I aim to kind of unravel some of the musts and the shoulds and the kind of dogmatic way about it, and actually bring it into a way that's really, really practical, that actually helps everyone in their day-to-day life in the moments when they need it, which is where you're going to feel the benefit. And I think today's conversation around like how there might be barriers for men is going to be really interesting in that area. My mind went right off on one when I was thinking about it, and to the point where I was like, there's too much there, throw those bits of paper up, let's just turn up and have a conversation, you know what I mean? It's like, but yeah, so
He's done his homework. I mean, when we've talked about what you do, you've always said, Dan, that you take a bit of a maverick approach to things because, like you say, some of the teachings and some of the, you know, the training that you had to undergo in order for you to practice it yourself, you've, you know, selected some, you know, obviously you've embraced all of it, but you focus more on some aspects more than others. Or tell us a bit more about kind of how you operate.
yeah, bang on there, Kirsty, that's absolutely right. I did use that word. I can remember the conversation with you. I did use that word a little bit, maverick, and I don't sort of want to paint the picture that I'm some sort of, you know, I'm reinventing the wheel in any way. You know, I'm not like egocentric in any way, but like there are things that I was, and it's going to be a kind of one of the points I think is going to come up about this idea that as a man, and I think this is a male thing, that to get behind something, I don't know whether this is going to resonate with Stu or not, but to get behind something, you have to really be able to invest in it. You have to really be able to get behind it and see it. And for me, there were elements of the teaching that I had where it's all really good, but it's a little bit like, this is how I describe it. It's almost like, if you take all those things I was talking about, all the sort of the practices of mindfulness and all the elements and the philosophy and the ideas that see it, it's almost like do this, do this, do this, do this, and you'll be mindful, sort of thing. But in my brain, when I tried to apply it, when I stepped out into the world and applied it, because I was introduced to it in my own sort of healing sort of process, and when I tried to apply it, I found there were barriers. I found there were things that were sticking points, things that didn't work. And I sort of came to the conclusion when I stepped out into the world as a coach that it's because it's missing a jigsaw piece, which is that how do you make all those teachings, not the teachings are wrong, but how do you take those teachings and how do they translate into a person's experience that are relevant, bearing in mind, going back to what I said, that every single person's experience and lens on life is uniquely theirs. So there ain't a one-size-fits-all methodology. So when I was talking about them going maverick bit, it's not really going maverick. It's just the fact that I build in an extra layer. I've expanded it a little bit, taken it a little bit stage further and gone, right, how can we take those teachings? And effectively there's like, I do traditional mindfulness, but then the other half of the pie is a bit of life coaching, because I see it as it's an essential element, because you can't really get the teachings and a person can't feel the benefit or tap into it without that jigsaw piece being in place. And so many times when I stepped out in the world, Kirsty, and I was promoting, I'd ask people at a festival, I'd say, have you heard of mindfulness? And they'd be like, yeah, I've heard of mindfulness. And the next question would be, what was your experience of it? Have you tried it? And they said, yeah, I tried it, couldn't really feel the benefits, didn't really understand what it did. And it's time and time again, there's only a handful, I think 2 or 3 people I've ever met in the last two bit years I've been doing it that have actually gone, yeah, I tapped into it really, but found it beneficial. But I just think there's that missing piece, and that's when I was talking about the maverick bit. That's what I mean. That's where I am slightly untraditional. I don't really teach traditional. I teach traditional, the teachings of traditional mindfulness, but the way I deliver it is different, you know, because of my own experiences to it, you know.
What were the walls that people that you spoke to were coming up against? Where if they're going into it with an open mind that, okay, I'm gonna try this. Like, what were the kind of walls that people were, that essentially, I guess, were the missing part of the puzzle? What was it they were coming up against that were like, no, it's not working?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. There's a few different ones, but the one that comes up time and time again, I think the one that comes to the very front of my mind, Stu, is this, because it's got a heavy meditational aspect to it. It's got meditation as part of it at its core. And mindfulness meditation is a different. This is going to sound like I'm going off on a little one, but it will actually answer your question. I have to kind of start with this just to be clear. Mindfulness meditation is different to other. There's a various forms of different meditation. One of them is what's known as concentrated meditation, which is the traditional form that if people that have never dipped their toe in the ocean of this world would think of, i.e., the completely clearing of the mind, it being you focus on one thing with the idea of the objective being you clear your mind. Right. And therefore, in that process, you find peace and calm away from the noise that's in your mind. Okay. That's like its objective. Mindfulness does it in a very different way. It almost rolls out the welcome mat to whatever is in this moment. So whatever is going on inside in terms of your internal landscape, in terms of whatever noise is happening, whatever thoughts and feelings are going on, you literally roll out the welcome mat and you let it be. And the idea being that by giving it space, a bit like, using an analogy, if your child is really wanting something from you, if you just go, be quiet, Timmy, be quiet, Timmy, they're just going to keep wanting because you're not satisfying their need, right? So it's a bit like that from the internal sort of workings of our mind. It's got needs. Parts of your mind has got needs, and it's just about honoring those needs. And if you can just give it time and space, it can almost soothe it and take the power and impact out of it. That's kind of what sits at the core of mindfulness. Now, when people try mindfulness, if that's not really explained to them or it's not really given to them in the context, and especially around the context of the fact that we have many, many, many thousands of thoughts a day that are not our own. We don't have control of them. They just happen to us. So we view them as mental events. And some of those mental events can be highly unhelpful. So when you talk to people out in the world to answer your question, people will say, oh yeah, I tried to sit and meditate and I couldn't find my calm and peace in that place, right? And it's like, and I'm like, I'm not going to swear, but no, Sherlock.
You can swear.
Because, yeah, oh, okay, well, no shit, Sherlock, then, right? Because I describe it like this, Stu. It's like, here's your place to go for meditation. And traditionally, it's like with the view of that is a sanctuary. You go there with the aim of finding some calm and peace because your life cocktail is giving you a need that you need that, right? But the problem is you'll go into that space bringing your life with you. And then you'll sit in that place and you're expecting yourself, especially if you're coming from the concentrated meditation angle of going, I want to clear my mind. I want to find peace and calm here. And you sit down and you meditate. And this is the common experience. This is answering your question. They'll sit down and meditate and they do it. They close their eyes. They do everything they've been told. They create a lovely environment for themselves. They turn off all their tech. They sit down on their yoga mat. They sit there. And within a nanosecond, their mind has gone to that thing that made them want to go to that place in the first place. Their loved one that's in hospital, the financial worries they've got, the problem, the argument they had an hour before with their partner, all these things, right? And it's a bit like kind of without meaning to, you're setting yourself up for fail, because then the meaning that comes out of that for someone when you talk to someone is like, oh yeah, I tried that, especially if they're being told by a coach to go and do that, then they come out and go, oh yeah, Dan told me to go and do that and I can't even do that. So not only am I a rubbish human because I've got all these problems, but now I can't even do it myself, So then the meaning that comes from it, the layers of secondary suffering that come out of it, just layer and layer and layer, exacerbate, layer and layer, and that is the common thing. So the way I approach it is very different. And this is where the maverick bit comes in, because I don't honestly hear anyone else talking about this. And I think this will resonate when we're talking about the men's side of it, is I view in mindfulness, when I look at the meditations, each one's got a teaching. And it's like the meditation space isn't about going and find your calm. It is about whatever is. So it's about going and training a particular technique that you can bring out of the meditation and use in your everyday life. So it's training ground. Your meditation is training ground. It's not about expected outcomes. It's not about
Mm.
finding calm. For instance, the foundation meditation of mindfulness is called the breathing space. And it's got a nickname called the hourglass, but a tree is a better analogy, where you start in an open, expanded awareness state, and you take in all the sounds around you and everything that's going on inside, all the thoughts that pop up, you recognize them. Some people like to put like leaves on the tree. I do. Other people like recognize them as clouds passing. Doesn't matter what visual analogy you use. The point is, it's about recognizing whatever it is, acknowledging it, and learning not to label it with good or bad. That's another mindfulness thing. Non-tagging, non-judgmental is one of the attitudes. And then the middle section is you narrow your awareness away from all that. So you give it space, roll out the welcome mat for it, and then you bring your awareness just onto your breathing. And you literally bring into your breathing. And then if your mind wanders, which it will, you just acknowledge it. Oh, my mind's wandering, and you gently guide it back. Now, that in itself can be really beneficial for you. Meditation is. I don't want to sit here and say to the world, meditation is a waste of time. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it ain't solely about just finding your peace and calm there, because that bit there about when your mind wanders, about bringing yourself back, that's the bit, that's the teaching. If you can take out beyond the meditation, when you're at your desk at work, or you're driving home in your van from site, and you've had loads of aggro from site, and you've got that job coming up tomorrow that you're already running behind on, you've already lost money on, and you're having that argument with your missus, you can, in that moment, anchor yourself in your breathing when all those thoughts are going. And my male clients, they've done that. They used to be in the hour drive home from site. Their thoughts would go out of control, and their aggression levels and their expectation of conflict would be through the roof before they even stepped through the door. And with this
expectation of conflict, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of building yourself up for it, even though it might not happen, you're just anticipating it and expecting it.
So that's where it can be beneficial. That's where it actually manifests in when you need it. So it's a teaching, taking the teaching, that's the important bit, So.
Dan, you mentioned anchors. Is that something that you utilize a lot? Because I'd done a course many years ago on NLP, and there was so much stuff around anchors in that I thought was really interesting. Is that something that is used in mindfulness?
It isn't specifically in the teachings of mindfulness, only in that one regard that I was saying about the idea, and it, to answer that a little bit interestingly, the idea of like using your breath as an anchor point in the moment, and it's like representation of like this current breath is the only one that's sustainable. So past breaths are come and gone, can't do anything about them. Future breaths, if you actually want to if you look at metaphorically your future breath or the next moment, if you want to influence the next moment, and moment not necessarily the next moment, but next day, week, whatever, then really you have to influence the now, don't you? You have to change in this moment in order to influence the next moment. So it's metaphorical in that sense, but it is also the whole Buddhist thing about coming out of the head space into the heart space thing. So it's got that link right back to that. But fundamentally, when I was talking about the anchor, and I did mention it, it isn't like it doesn't scatter throughout all of the teaching of Michael. It's just in that one way, to answer your question there. It's just a really good reminder, right? That you can just, and what's beautiful about it, and this is where it's going to link in, I think, again, to some of our conversations later, maybe if it goes there, is that for men, the idea of somebody knowing that they're doing something can depend on what environment you're in. If you're in a hostile work environment or whatever, or you don't want to be judged for some reason, can expose you to that judgment. But if you can do something, you don't need to sit on a yoga mat for, don't have to go and sit in a quiet space. You can anchor yourself in your breathing with your eyes open, sitting at your desk, driving your digger, lugging that timber across, using your nail gun, doing that document if you're a solicitor, wherever you are, man, woman, child. And that's where this conversation is about men, obviously, and we're obviously focusing on that, but it's a human thing. You don't need to go and have a space. You just need to understand what the teaching is, what the purpose is, and what it is you need to do for yourself to soothe yourself and regain control and composure in that moment.
I think one of my favorite anchors that I tend to use, obviously, as I've spoken about a lot about on the podcast, I struggle with anxiety quite marvelously. And one of the anchors that I use is, name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can smell, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can hear, that's something that I've always found really useful. I don't know if I was just going to jump in there before you were going to say something, Stu, but I was just going to say, Dan, obviously we've talked a lot about, you've alluded to the fact that we're going to be, linking mindfulness to men, and yeah, you could possibly perceive that mindfulness is a bit more of a feminine thing. It's got a bit more of a feminine slant on it. It's a bit of a hippie thing, she said, dreadlocks in her hair. How did you come to it? Why, what brought you to mindfulness?
Okay, so yeah. So I was introduced to mindfulness in my own. So I don't want to dominate the conversation with the Dan's like show, but I was introduced to it in my own sort of in 2019. I was introduced to it when I reached out to a lady called Roanna Harstead. She runs a coaching company called My Relaxation Coach, and basically I reached out to her after my divorce. I came through a divorce, and instead of when I got my own flat, and I thought it would be, oh, excellent, that's going to be my trampoline onto the life I want. Everything's all going to be groovy. I basically just spent so long enduring being in this rubbish place that I just unraveled once I got to that point. So I was that guy that had nothing good to say. I had a bleak outlook on the future. I had zero self-worth. Like, yeah. So it was grim. And then by reaching out, Stu, you mentioned NLP. She was a neuro-linguistic program trained, but she's a hypnotherapist. Well, she's like a master coach. She does all of that, right, and more. But she introduced mindfulness to me because it was incredibly helpful for me to be able to see that noise that I was having, those voices that were threatening my sense of self-worth, the things that were creeping in that were giving me that bleak view. They were all mental events. So that's where the relevance goes back time to that. And that's where I was introduced to it. Go for it, Steve. So I'll go for it.
And just to jump in there, like, it sounded like you was at a pretty low ebb there, mate. And at that point, can you tell me why? I guess a lot of people at that point will reach out to maybe a therapist or go and see their doctor and explain to their doctor they're not feeling great. Was that anything you done any of that before, or why was it you leant more towards the sort of mindfulness? Because as Kirsty touched upon, I do think it's changing, but I think a lot of men would, it's hard enough to get them to go to the doctor and explain they don't feel great, and to then look at the words like mindfulness and well-being, you're going to be met with cynicism from a lot of men. Can you tell me why you found that avenue, and did you explore any other avenue first?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I think the honest truth to that, Stu, is there's a couple of layers to that. First and foremost, I already knew Roanna. Okay, I knew her through my brother. She's a yoga teacher. My brother was doing yoga. He was now a yoga teacher himself. So she was already in my life. I already knew what she did. I'd already, already spoken to her a few times. I knew what she was about. Kind of got on with her. So that door was kind of already open to me, right? Excuse me. The second side of it is I don't think I was very much raised by my mum. Like, I'm very much my mother's son, right? So I've got like quite a few feminine traits. I think I'm, if we think about women that like will sit across a table with a cup of coffee and talk to each other about stuff, like you say, men are not like that. They're more stoic and more take 6 months to work side to side with someone on a project before they're prepared to open up and talk, right? That kind of thing. Now, I've always carried more like that feminine way. I'm going to be honest. I'm sitting here with the absolute truth there that is definitely an element and a factor where I've always been pretty open about how I talk and that. Do you know what I mean? So I sort of count my blessings there in a way, because maybe, as you say, if I didn't have that, I might not have overcome that barrier. And I'd like to talk about those barriers. I really would. As I say, I really would like to talk about it, because I think that's going to be a really key takeaway for your listeners. I'm sort of yearning, my heart's yearning for that. But just to answer you in absolute authenticity, there's that. So the door was kind of already open to me, and my way was maybe a little bit, again, different to maybe a lot of men, if I'm honest, I know that probably ain't helpful to your listeners, right? Because your listeners really benefit from going, oh, well, that ain't helpful to me, because, how does it help me, But I have got information that I'd like to share around that, and why
I think it's important what you said there. The fact that you said, like, the door was already open, that's like having that friend that you can mention something to. And if the door's already open, it's a lot easier, isn't it, to chat to somebody that is there and he's open for conversation, rather than maybe going to the doctor or whatever. You know, I understand why that would be an easier path. If the conversation's there and the door's open, then yeah, of course.
But it was also desperation as well. Sorry, Kirsty. Sorry, you first.
No, go on.
You sure?
Mm.
All right, just a quick bolt on then. Okay, it's just a quick bolt on. So the bolt onto that, but I was at that place where it was, I think I've always been positive minded generally as a person. You know, I didn't grow up from a privileged background. Not that money's everything. I don't mean like that, but what made me say that isn't about a correlation between money and mental health, but just the fact that even when I grew up in a household that had humble background, there was always love in my house. But like, as a child, my childhood was, you know, I had a great childhood, I think, you know, and I feel blessed for that, and I thank my parents for it eternally for that. But I think that has always shaped me to have this generally positive mindset, right? So when I was in that place, and I had that bleak view, I just knew it was like alarm. I knew this wasn't me. This is like I'm in this really bad place. That was the catalyst, I think, for me, Stu, to go, this can't continue, you know. So I had that lens going back to that. I think that's a really critical point to hang on when you think about what would be the driving mechanism for somebody reaching out. Now, first it's charity, reach out for mental health, right? I mean, let's just like hang there for a minute. What is, you encounter this all the time, Kirsty, right? Those barriers to what makes somebody reach out, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what I was going to say, you know, still ties in exactly with what you've just said. I'm wondering that, you know, if there was any other guys that were in a similar situation to you, where they might have, you know, known either directly or through a friend of a friend, you know, a mindfulness coach or a well-being coach or a life coach or any, you know, anything kind of down that skill set, even if there was somebody on their kind of on their horizon, you know, would they still approach that? Would they still say, listen, going through a bit of a shit time, don't really want to go down the meds route, not really sure I want to go through the therapy route, might try a little bit of mindfulness. Do you know what I mean? Again, I think it's very much down to what you've said, Dan. I think it's down to your upbringing and the relationship that you'd have had with your mum, your mum being that great example of being, you know, an open book and talking about your feelings and problems and, you know, kind of transparency. And again, it all comes down to how you're raised. You know, this kind of male toxicity, masculine toxicity that we're seeing at the moment. You know, obviously Stu and I doing this podcast, we've talked about this many times, and doing what I do and talking about reducing suicides, you know, services like mine and so many other amazing services that are available, whether they're, you know, charity or, you know, statutory services. By and large, you can have services along your high street, but it's making sure that men, we're talking about men, feel able to actually access that, open that door, make that phone call, and start that journey, for want of a better word. And it all goes down back to your childhood. So this is what I'm saying to people now. It's about the next generation. Have the conversations with your sons now about, you know, emotional intelligent. Oh, I hate using that phrase, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I think I just want to kind of pin on that, really.
I couldn't agree more with that. Like, Stu, unless you've got something to say, can I respond back to that?
Yeah, of course.
Ah, cool. Okay. So in that, for me, Kirsty, there's a few things, right? So absolutely, 100%, I agree with you. There is a shift happening. I think there's a shift happening, and the shift is happening in that. I think the key, that what we're talking about is barriers. We're talking about barriers there to somebody, as you say, being able to overcome the fear of the stigma maybe that's attached to it, or the fear of the judgment that might come if they expose themselves and put themselves on a plate and go, I acknowledge there's something not right. And it's almost like that fear of acknowledgement, because that's also scary to you when you're at your lowest ebb as well. It's scary to yourself to go, I've got to confront that. Because if you think about it from the point of view of where you're standing in that place when you're at the lowest, and again, if we link it into the point of oftentimes men will only really get to that point of even considering reaching out once they've got really close to crisis point anyway. So if you take it all into account, you look at it as the cocktail that is in place, you've got this person who's right on the edge already, at a point where they're already feeling very vulnerable internally, do they want to expose themselves to what is effectively more threat to their human experience, right? So it's all about threat to you and everything and how you're feeling. So the barrier to that is, I think, the framing. And if I had a magic wand, I would implant this thought into every bloke's mind. It's this idea that the idea of opening up and going, I acknowledge I'm not right, isn't a weakness. It's actually like a form of going. It's almost like if like, and I'm going to be crass here, but it's almost like if it was a football match and it was about to, a fight was about to kick off, you'd be the one in the group that was like, I'm not scared, I'm going to step forward here. Now that's really unpleasant. But it's that analogy of like, you don't fear what could come to you. You go and meet it. So like when I said about the mindfulness, about, you know, rolling out the welcome mat to what being, it's almost like that trains you in a way with a mindset of being able to go and be prepared to sit in discomfort a bit, because the outcome, the yield is greater than this initial short-term pain that you might have to go through. So if I could reframe in every man's mind that it's actually a form of strength to go, fuck it, I'm going to go and face this, then they might have gone through the journey that I've gone through, where I end up coming out feeling like that, to feeling actually, you know, life's worth living, and, you know, things are worth doing, and you can bring value to this world, and you're not this and you're not that, and you can release from all the meaning. Now, that's one aspect of it, and I'm sorry I'll go off on one here, but the other aspect of it is that if the way I teach mindfulness, about that way of like meditations being like a training ground, then what it does, it creates this almost flowchart way of thinking about things. So it's like, you, first of all, something spikes up. You have in a situation, you have that cocktail of happen, that argument with your missus, you know, you get pressure from your supervisor at work, you know, you're losing money, you're worried, all that's cocktail. In that moment, you can first create the space. Then you can discern what's the priority. You can action on the priority. You can come out of it with practical action plans. Men are action orientated. So anything that's philosophical is instantly going to be like, well, I can't get behind it if I can't see a positive. So using mindfulness in the way that I teach it becomes more action orientated, therefore becomes more of a practical translation of your everyday experience, which then means that people can then be more empowered in what they're doing. But it actually means that you can, it basically then that reframes it in a guy's mind, because it's not just this philosophical, oh, I'm going to sit down and find peace in meditation. It's like, oh, I've got this tool now that I can use to unravel when things get a bit like rough, and I can navigate my way through that with more calm and clarity, more power over my choice, and I can step into the next note and decide on what I'm going to do to resolve that. And it becomes a much more practical translation. Therefore, I argue, and I argue this to the cows come home, that mindfulness, when it's done with the level of bridge that I try to promote, that it can become a mindset tool. And therefore, if you talk to, like, even the word mindfulness, right? Mindfulness sounds like it's
wanky,
philosophical, doesn't it? It sounds I want to sometimes move away. Like, not, I don't want to move away from it. That's wrong. But even I have like a little, you know, like, yeah, I wish I could. And that's why I argue to the cows come home that if it's used right, it can be a mindset tool. Now, you put that in the idea of a man, it'll be different. It will land different. It'll more likely to be able to get behind it. More likely to go, actually, all right, I'll go and learn that. It might actually be able to help me when I've got that job running over. The last 4 jobs has impacted me, and now I am down on money, and I'm driving home. I know I'm going to have that discussion with my ex-wife as I walk up. And I can tell you, I sit with authenticity in front of everyone here, and anyone who's listening, there have been times where I use it every day, every single day of my life. And only once in the last year, in one instance, has my mindfulness failed me. Once. Now,
why do you think that was?
It was a particular cocktail of things that tapped into previous traumas of mine that made me the situation I was in gave rise to some really old sort of wounds, and it just made me flare up so much that the feeling, and there's a book that's staring me over there. It's called The Body Keeps a Score. It's written by a guy called what's his name? Yeah, Bessel van der Kolk. He's a professor in trauma. And basically what happens is when the studies show that when you have a traumatic response, when you have a trauma response to when something triggers something from the old days, effectively what happens is the amygdala, the left part of your brain, is a little section, it's your threat control center. It fires up so intensely that your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for like logical thought and rational, clear thinking, gets shut down. It actually reduces. They've done they've done brain scans of that, of people when they're having trauma responses. And I think that's what was happening to me. I think I definitely wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't think clearly. I didn't think through my actions. I didn't think through the consequence of my actions, and I acted rashly, and it had an impact. And but that is the only, not 99% of the time, it has not let me down. Now, you know.
Sorry, Dan, can carry on.
No, that's, look, mate, I'm done. That's it. I said it. I don't need to, because I could talk for them. You know.
And when your friend, was it Rowana, you said?
Rowana,
yeah. When you decided to pursue that avenue, did you initially hit them walls that you mentioned and we spoke about earlier? Did you experience that, and what made you persevere and continue through it?
Good question. I did hit the walls. I hit the walls of when I was being asked to reflect on things between my coaching sessions, when I was being asked to like measure what my emotion and what it felt like in my body when I had a spike of that emotion. I give it a number, and then the process that they give you to help you unravel that in a moment. It's effectively training you to catch it in the moment. Like when I was having that, I was having, because the thoughts were so intense, I had this belief that it wasn't going to be enough. It wasn't going to help me. I was standing there and going, I'm doing what Ryan's asking me, but you know, this seems stupid. This seems silly. You know, I've already tried this. You know, I've already tried to do this before. It ain't going to work. This lens of negativity, this lens of, you know, not open at all to the possibility that I just need to retrain my mind.
Yeah.
That it's just like going to the gym. Just like you go to the gym and train your body, you can train the mind. You know, that right there fits in with the concept of neuroplasticity for anyone who is interested in that. This idea, these old ideas that you learn, you're fixed, and that's it to the day you die. And it's not true. It's been proven to be not true. You know, so I was in that mindset and that view of, nah, there's nothing that can be done. I'm screwed. You know, I'm screwed. It wasn't true.
So what can we do for men? What can we do to get men to embrace mindfulness? Can we reframe it as something else? I mean, I've always said it's the same with getting them to come to counselling. If we said, do you want to come and do a life coach session? Do you want 6 weeks of free life coach sessions? We'd have them queuing up round the block. But it's counselling, it's vulnerable, it's emotional. Oh, don't like it. Oh, no.
Yeah, good question. Just before I answer that, just the last response to Stu, what got me over that and got me over those things when I had that was also excellent coaching from Ro. Right,
yeah,
it goes a long way. You know, the expertise of Rowana doing. So that's a big, when you're being guided, when you're going along a path, and somebody else is going that journey and they hit those bumps, but you've already been on the path, you can just bring your experience to bear and help them out. And it's that place when you hit those barriers and those boundaries where you actually learn about yourself and where you learn exactly what's going on. That's where you grow. So that is a key component, I would say, to somebody actually overcoming that stuff. So just but then in response to you there, Kirsty, what can we do? I think it's about language, a big part of your language, but I think anonymity. I know, like I'm an advocate for saying everything I say, shouting to the world about what I believe in, having come from my own experience. Right? I'm an advocate for that. But just like I said, everyone's life cocktail different. Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for John or Brian or Dave, right? And I think that anonymity, that ability.
Those names.
Classic. Yeah, exactly. I'll pick some classics there, right? I mean, what would you have picked? Just out of
Gerard.
Well, I just
Rupert.
There you go, some proper old school names going on here. Yeah, I just think that I think having a diverse range of opportunities. So some people do well with group, like they like to. But now, I would say that generally, as in my experience, men prefer one-to-one.
100%.
So the group thing is exactly that. It opens up that vulnerability, that acknowledgement of I don't. And it's I think the route to it initially, if you wanted me to say me a model, I would say anonymity, one-to-one, and with a reframed sort of the way it gets presented. So the way you present it to a guy, I think if you put me in a room with 12 guys and you asked me, if you locked me in a room and said, Dan, talk to them about mindfulness, the language I would use to them would be very different to it would be if I went to a forum of 200 people, mixed men and women. It would be a very different, it's the way that you relate, right? And the way that you express what you're trying to say and what you think the outcomes could be, you know? So I think anonymity, one-to-one, and I think that the language of how you approach it, you know, I'm very down to earth with what I do. I've in fact to the point where I try to avoid a lot of philosophy because I believe the philosophy bit, it sits behind it, and I only really teach that if people
you can lose people with it.
If people are interested, I'll go there because I'm quite philosophical myself. I quite like that, and I think it can bring value to your way of thinking about things. That's what I think. But you know, I wouldn't sit there and teach someone about the history of it and where it fits in with Buddhism because it's ultimately irrelevant. What's important is how it translates. And in mindfulness, there's formal mindfulness and informal mindfulness, right? And it's just the two aspects. And formal mindfulness is just anything you take time out of your day to sit down and do. So sitting down, doing a meditation, whatever. Informal mindfulness is this idea of like you carry mindfulness with you all the time. So you've got that presence of mind, that awareness to catch things when they happen and unravel it, like I said, about the process of, right? So that's important. Now in my coaching, I hop, skip straight to that. I go straight to, I fast track to because that for me is the end game. That's the end where people are within 2 weeks. My clients will be like, oh, I see how I can use that. And then loads of other stuff comes in, setting boundaries, gatekeeping, understanding that an opinion. I could sit here and throw an opinion at you, Stu, but that doesn't mean it's right. But the problem is when you're at your lowest ebb, if you was at your lowest ebb and I was a close friend and I came up to you or I was a family and I gave you this really powerful opinion, you would be open and receptive to it. You'd be open with it, so that can be really damaging to you, or it can be undermining accidentally sometimes, but it can be. So I teach boundary setting. I teach all these other aspects that form this almost like this spider's web package, if you would, that build emotional resilience and build clarity about yourself. And that you was reluctant, Kirsty, to use the word emotional intelligence. But I don't think you should shy away from that because I don't think by saying emotional intelligence, you're knocking people down that have not yet. Like, I don't, it's not about saying, oh, I'm building my emotional intelligence. That means everyone else is an emotional fucknut. You're not saying, you're just saying, like, you're building, everyone's on their own journey, as you say, we're building that. And it's just about developing that in our own ways and sharing that. So I understand why you had that pain, but I would say don't worry about it. I try not to shy away from that because I think it's a good term for it, I think, you know.
I think another thing that men might like, something I learned years and years and years ago when I used to co-facilitate like a stress management workshops. And again, it was predominantly men. You had a couple of women, but predominantly it was men. And, you know, you'd sit there and you'd talk about breathing techniques and you'd see them glaze over and they'd just be looking at the walls or like fiddling with their nails and stuff. But when you actually start talking about the science behind it and the actual physiological implications and the impact that it's having on your body, it's a bit like, you know, talking about mindfulness and breathing, it's kind of an act of faith, whereas some people are very much people of science and they need to see the proof of what it's actually going to do. I think if people, especially men, had more of an idea about if you know, doing this is going to do this to your brain, which in turn is going to do this to your heart rate and it's going to do this to your cortisol levels and your adrenaline and blah blah blah. If they actually see the nuts and bolts of it, it's easier for them to get their teeth into and get behind, as you say, in my experience.
I agree with you 100%. That my notes that I had.
Have I got your note?
Well, you basically when you said about like the belief element, that's when I wrote down my notes. I was talking about my notes. I'm going to read them out. So men have to be truly get behind something, and because men are action orientated, i.e., fixers, I wrote, then anything that has a philosophical or requirement that you have to believe in it. Or that your belief is derived from rather than being able to see a direct result of an action step, then that can undermine a man's ability to get behind it. So what you were saying there is exactly what I was thinking. It is exactly that. Like you get you give, it's just, maybe that's a difference between men and women. I don't really dwell on that side of things too much. I just see my company name's called A Human Space. So I very much come at things from how we're humans, right? And fundamentally, we've got the same brains. Now, some men and women will joke about that, men are from Mars, women are from Venus and all that sort of thing. But fundamentally, we're humans and we've got the same brains. But it's like, I agree. There are maybe differences in how we process, and men have to have something they can anchor on to be able to get behind it. If you're asking someone just to blindly believe something and then they try it and it's like, this feels vacuous to me, then they're not going to be able to get behind it. And you can't force the heart into doing something, right? You could try and you can't, Stu, it's like, right? How many times has somebody tried to make you do something? You're like, nah. And Kirsty, I know you're the same, right? I know what you're like, right? You can't just get behind something if somebody's telling you to get behind it. You have to be able to feel it, right? And I think that what you said there, Kirsty, is bang on in terms of, if you inform, right, information, and that's where the power of science can come into this. The information of understanding that there are different parts of your brain all designed to do different things. There's one part that's logic, one part that's trying to control threats, and that part that's in your brain is reliant on your is stuck inside your skull. Over millions of years, it's evolved to keep you safe, right? It has no idea the difference between a tiger trying to eat you or you being undermined in a boardroom. It doesn't know. It relies on your central nervous system to tell you that there's a threat, right? So another book over there, The Threat Meaning Power Framework. Fascinating.
Yes, that's your Bible, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, there's so many interesting things. Go on, Stu, go for it.
I wanted to touch on that because it was the thing that just jumped at me the most from our conversation so far was a while back when you said about the word threat. And I think even through personal experience, like when I'm stressed beyond belief and I think, right, I'm trying to deal with this, to go and speak to someone and then have to go, well, this is probably because I don't want to have that conversation because I've got enough on my plate and I'll have a beer, I'll have a glass of wine. And ultimately, I know that that's fucked. But that was the thing that really resonated, that you said it's that crossing that thing of like, right, look, because at the moment, I can't see that far in ahead. All I can see is what's staring me in the face, which is a fucking awkward conversation that I don't want to have. And I think that's really important that you brought that up and that ultimately you're not going to get anywhere unless that conversation's had, because that is theoretically the doorway to happiness.
Hard, right?
Yeah.
And it's really hard. Like I hear you that absolutely. And I think if I would lay money. I'd lay money right here on the fact that if you could somehow gather the data of men's experiences, 95% of it would be, that's the point right there where it's like maybe the world's presenting them with all these opportunities that they know that there's reach out for mental health there. They know there's this there. They know there's like that there, and it's all there. And it's just like, what's that? And it's that bit.
And do you know what? And that does tie in with the fact that obviously we know that men are far more likely to die by suicide than women. We know that 75% of all suicides are completed by men. And, one of the key components, one of the key contributors of that is the fact that men are so much more impulsive than women. That's why, I don't want to talk about anything too triggering here, but that's why when men do make an attempt or die by suicide, it's because they use lethal means. Rather than women who use less lethal means. They are so much more impulsive. And I think, again, talking about that response to threat and almost like an instinct, like a protective factor to keep themselves away from that. This could be, it all links in, doesn't it? It all makes sense. It's all interconnected.
It's because it's all the different parts of your mind. The part that's trying to keep you safe is trying to, it's trying to help you. So something happens, that part of you is just trying to help you survive in that moment. In that moment, whatever it is on the spectrum of whether you've undermined in a boardroom, fairly significant, although really pisses you off, all the way through to something really, really bad. All that's happening is you're trying, there's a part of you that's trying to protect you, and it will protect you in whatever way, whether that's freeze, flight, or fight. Right? But the other side of the human experience is that we have the thing that happened, Then we have what I call the second. It's not my term, but secondary suffering, i.e., the emotional spike comes from it, or the way it makes you feel. So, Kirsty, you say something to me, really undermines me. I'm like, oh, that pissed me off. That makes me feel really crappy. That's my feeling I've got. Now, the story doesn't stop there, because as humans, we've then got a third stage, which is the meaning that's taken from that. So the meaning might be, oh, brilliant, like this person I respect, now they think I'm a right whatever. And then now, now, so you carry that with you. And if it happens with you, and it happens with Brian, Gerard,
Rupert.
if it happens with Rupert, and it happens with, with your wife, and it happens, before you know it, you've got this cluster of data that's telling you and confirming Dan's this, me, I'm this, right? So the meaning that gets taken from it is what we carry. Now, when we talk about the mental health bit, circling right back down about how, because I've got a thing here I really wanted to link, is how does all this fit in with mental health, right? And I think that bit right there it's that bit that we carry is what is one of the most impactful things on your mental health. It's the beliefs that we form around ourselves, the meaning we take from stuff. And this is where mindfulness can help, because it can help unravel that, and with the discernment process I spoke about, help you go, okay, I took that meaning from it, let me go and have a conversation with Kirsty. Oh, I get it, I just took it the wrong way, she didn't mean it like that. Oh, fuck, right. I overreacted there, fair enough. Now all of a sudden that meaning it's evaporated, ain't there no more. So it can promote communication, understanding, self-awareness, and it therefore, from a mental health standpoint, I believe, with using mindfulness as a mindset tool framed in that way, it can be a preventative measure for getting too far along that line, that sliding scale towards the bad end of the mental health. My belief only. Humble, but it's my belief.
Dan, if people have been listening to this and have been, inspired, affected, interested by what you and your business does, where's the best place to go and sort of reach out and find more, Dan?
Okay, amazing, thank you. It's a humanspace.co.uk is my website. A humanspace.co.uk.
Okay.
www. So yeah, that's where it is at the moment. My website is a little bare in terms of services I've got up, and it's on purpose because I've kind of changed my model. I've still got basically the way I'm working is on there is the option to reach out to me for a free half-an-hour consultation. It's just a chat. Everything from a mental health standpoint starts with a human conversation, right? We know that. It starts with a conversation. So with no obligation, no pressure. It's just an opportunity to reach out and talk to me. And it's at that point, in that conversation, a person can ask their questions. I can get an idea of what their cocktail is. You can formulate some sort of idea around what a roadmap might look like, and then they can go away and think about it. And then if they choose to, I generally these days, I will set up bespoke programs for people, bearing in mind that one of the barriers a lot of people need to be helped with their mental health, as we know, are people that are not in the strongest of financial positions, right? So I used to have my courses up, I used to have that. Now I'm just like, let's have a conversation. What do you need? I've done concessions for people. I care more about helping people than I do making the buck. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to make. I've got my day job. I work for a charity, again aligned with what I'm about. I work in men's health. I work for I'm a project lead in the Essex Shed Network project, which is fundamentally a men's mental health project. So I'm covering my bills, and this is a garden that I'm growing, right? And I'm passionate about growing a garden. But I care more about helping people. I'd rather see someone come out the other side of whatever they did with engage with me and in a better place, and then keep my rates at whatever. Just to give some context, my hourly rate is, and I'm not here doing a plug or whatever, but it's £25 an hour, which is lower than your average life coach. And I'm doing what I consider to be a fairly sophisticated, high level form of what I do. I've taken the teachings of mindfulness, I've adapted them using my own personal experience, I've formulated effectively what's the Dan Thompson curriculum of it, and I apply it in a very bespoke way. I'm giving bespoke coaching that's underpinned by a bespoke philosophy. And I don't care. I just want to help people. You know what I mean? I just want to help people. So yeah, but a humanspace.co.uk, thank you for the opportunity for me to say that and give that shout out. Cool.
Mate, it's been delightful, Dan, talking to you. And I think for an audio medium as well, podcasting, like hearing people talk, how you talk with the voice that you've got and the accent that you've got.
Danny Dyer, didn't I say? Mindfulness with Danny Dyer. Fucking brilliant.
It's good because, you know, as you say, like, I think so many people are reluctant to step forward if somebody sounds very well educated and things like that. Sometimes people can be a little bit intimidated by that. And I think, you know, not that you're not an intellectual at all, Dan, that's not what I mean by it. But when you sound like somebody that, you know, somebody
lives down the road, yeah,
then it's far more easy to relate and have a conversation. So I think it's really important that people with voices like yours are in this space.
I acknowledge that. That's very, I hear you, and I think that's absolutely bang on. And I think, and look, I'm there's nothing special about me. I'm just another person who's lived. You've got your life. You've lived your life, Stu. You have, Kirsty. Everyone who's listening to this has got their life. It's that saying, like, everyone's a guru if you're willing to listen. It's like everyone's got a wisdom to share, and it's like, look, what led me to this was a life-changing set of circumstances, and it took me to, and I won't go into that, but basically I was looking to the future and I was like, I don't want to stay in my old career because it's doing my head in. I haven't got anything I'm passionate about. What can I do? That's what I got led to the course. I was like, I know, I've always been someone who cared about people. Maybe I could do that. And I started to explore it, and then I got really passionate and I realized I could do it, right? So that's what's led me here. But like, I'm not an intellectual. You know, I'm just someone who's got my own lived experience and I'm living it out. And that's what everyone's doing. And I think that's all you need. You know, I mean, I would argue that lived experience is more powerful than learning from a book anyway. Not to say that studying
100%. I've been banging that drum for years.
Yeah, and I'm not obviously knocking anyone down who studies. I'm not doing that because, like, in some ways, I look at them and I look up to them. I'm like, well, you studied and that's good, and I will always respect and give that due respect. But I'm just saying, like, if you're sitting in front of someone from a human to human point of view, I mean, Kirsty, you've been working with like the Lions Barber Trust and stuff like that. Well, one of the philosophies of what underpinned me calling my business a human space was this idea of, like, when you're sat in the taxi cab on your own, you haven't got anyone else here, or you're sat in your barber's chair and there's that little one-to-one bubble, like that fosters an environment for people to be open, and it's like lived experience comes in then, because when you're interacting with that other human being and they say something, if you've got the lived experience, even if you haven't lived the exact same experience, if you've got something that you can translate your experience to them, it means your empathy and your compassion's deepened. It means you can actually tune in more to what that other human being is saying. And therefore, you know, most of communication is more than just words. It's about how you listen. Whether you know, it's like, Stu, looking in someone's eyes, you're looking in them when you're talking to them. You know whether they're being real with you, generally, unless they're a really good liar. You know whether someone's being real with you. Authenticity, lived experience, human touch, that in my opinion goes a long way, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, and so yeah, cool. But look, it's been a pleasure being on here. Thank you for the opportunity to.
No, thank you.
Thank you. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
and
looking forward to getting the feedback from this one. 100%.
Completely. Dan,
yeah, cool. Go for it. Sorry.
We'll put the website in the show notes so people can go and find it and go and find out more and reach out to you. Mate, thanks so much for giving up your time today. It's been an absolute joy chatting to you, mate.
Man. Yeah, cool. Appreciate it. Yeah.
We're going to press stop, but don't go anywhere.
Oh, cool. No worries.